Hi everyone. Just waiting a few more minutes so more people will connect. Tell me if you can hear me properly. Thanks, Sally. Thank you. Wonderful. Oh, hello, Diana. So, let's start slowly. And of course, you can, if you have any question, you can just write in the comments and I'll try to follow the comments. And if for any reason I missed the question, there is still a Q&A session at the end. So, hi everyone. Thank you for being here. So this is a small conference tonight that I wanted to hold to talk about skin, cold, and stress. And the subtitle of this conference was like, why modern grooming can no longer be only about technique. So my name is Nathalie Douaria-Juglar. This is French. So if you are too English, don't try to say it. It's too complicated. So Nathalie is fine for me. So I am a grooming educator. I am also the founder and the president of the International Grooming Society. And I am the founder of the DAATA, Data Grooming Method, which is a French acronym, which stands for, basically in English, dermatology applied to grooming. So we are going to talk about why grooming has to be not only about technique. Of course, technique is essential. Of course, it is. I'm not here to tell you it doesn't matter, because it does matter. But when it comes to technique, it only answers one question. And this question is, how do I perform this action? It does not always answer the other questions, like what is this action doing to the skin? What is this doing to the coat? What is the animal actually feeling on the table or in the bathtub? What is happening inside the body? And what is this way of working doing to the groomer as well, day after day? Because there is three things that are very important to me when it comes to grooming. Pet well-being, of course, and I think it's important for everybody. Every groomer enter this profession with a love for pets. If they don't, they need to change their job. But so normally all of them do that for the pet and the love of them. So pet well-being is very important. The groomer well-being is also very important to me, because there is a possibility that we can take care of the dog and take care of ourselves at the same time. And the third point that is very important to me is sustainability of the job. So I will develop a little bit later. So when we talk about modern grooming, let's begin with a simple situation. A dog or a cat, whatever. A dog leaves the salon perfectly clean. The coat is straight, soft, beautifully finished. the haircut is precise, the photograph looks wonderful, and the owner is delighted. Okay, so from a traditional technical perspective, the groom is successful, right? But now imagine that during that appointment, the dog was panting, pulling away, sitting repeatedly, they don't want to stay still, was trying to escape from the bathtub, jumping from the table, fighting the dryer, or becoming very tense. Or imagine that the groomer had to hold the animal more firmly, work in uncomfortable positions, repeat the same movements again and again, and finish the appointment physically and emotionally exhausted. And imagine maybe that the dog scratched after the appointment, appeared uncomfortable, or returned to the next session already anxious. So even if the dog walked out perfectly beautiful, was the groom still completely successful? So it's not a question designed to make anyone feel guilty. It is a professional question. If the visual result is excellent, but the process unnecessarily compromises the skin, the coat, the animal's well-being, or the groomer's health, then our definition of professional success is incomplete. So modern grooming needs a wider definition of quality. And I want to make something very clear from the beginning. The problem is not that traditional groomers do not care about pets, because they do, The problem is that grooming education has historically concentrated on the visible result. We learn how to wash, we learn how to brush, how to dry, how to clip, how to scissor, shape, style, finish, spray, etc. We learn the breed standards, we learn how to remove the knots to create volume, straighten the coat, etc., etc. But many groomers receive very, very little in-depth education about the actual living structures beneath the result. They are asked to work on skin every day, but they do not fully study how skin functions. They work with follicles and hair growth, but most of them are not taught how exactly the hair cycle or the fur is working. They remove sebum, but most of the time they don't realize that sebum is not only grease, it has physiological roles. And also we use products, We use products, and these products are described sometimes as pH balanced or shampoos for dogs, professional shampoos for dogs or for cats. But we are not given the specific, scientific context needed to understand what exactly this shampoo is doing to the skin or the coat, So when we eliminate the sebum, we eliminate the skin microbiota, which is very important. And most of us do not know what's inside this flora. We don't know what it is. We don't know what it's doing and the purpose of it. We just flush it away. So it's not that we don't care. It's just that most of us, we have like a gap in professional education. So when grooming is organized primarily around technique, appearance, speed, control, then we have main important things that are overlooked. First of all, the skin will be treated as though it were simply the surface. It's just a surface underneath the hair. But it's not. Skin is an organ. It's a barrier. It's a sensory interface. It's an immune environment. It's a home for complex microbial communities. And it's actually part of the animal's thermoregulatory system. So the skin is living. So we have to be very careful with what we're doing. The coat, Second, the coat. The coat most of the time will be treated as though it were like inert material that we can wash and heat and pull and brush and stretch and reshape without consequence. But of course, if we talk about the visible hair shaft, it's not living tissue, it's dead cells, okay? But it has a physical structure. It is produced by a living follicle and it interacts with other hairs like an organized fabric. Exactly, like an organized fabric. So water, heat, friction, products, brushing and drying, they will all influence that structure and the way the coat behaves. And third, movement can be interpreted too quickly as disobedience. An animal that moves during grooming may be afraid. It may also be in pain, tired, losing balance, experiencing thermal discomfort, feeling excessive traction on the skin, or responding to sensory overload. And our lack of knowledge in this matter very often make us come to the conclusion that this dog is just difficult. And fourth, the groomer's body is often treated as an unlimited resource. You know, we normalize back pain, painful shoulders, tired wrist, headaches, fatigue, emotional overload, and we think it's normal. I'm a groomer, so at the end of the day, I'm very tired. My back hurts. I have the feeling that I'm overwhelmed at the end of the day because I had so many dogs and I had big dogs, etc. But it's not. It shouldn't be normalized. A profession that damages the people performing it is not sustainable. So animals and groomers need the profession to evolve. This evolution is necessary for 4 connected reasons. The first is better respect of the skin. The second is better respect of pets' well-being. The third is the need to make grooming less physically and emotionally damaging or demanding for the groomer. And the fourth is the need to build sustainable businesses. When an animal is more comfortable, it often moves less, so it will require less restraint. When less restraint is required, the groomer will use less force, spend less time in twisted position, and experience less conflict. When sessions become more predictable and professionally reasoned, communication with the customer becomes clearer. When the groomer protects their health, they have a greater chance of remaining in the profession. So, when the business is based on knowledge, adaptation, trust, and quality, instead of constant physical struggle, it becomes more sustainable. This is why I think that the future of grooming can be built by changing one isolated technique. We need to understand the entire system. So let us begin with skin and coat health. Traditional grooming often celebrates the sensation of an extremely clean coat. We sometimes hear expressions such as squeaky clean, as if the complete removal of everything present on the surface were automatically desirable. But healthy skin is not sterile, and it's not physiologically empty. The surface includes water, it includes lipids, it includes sebum, corneocytes, microorganisms, and chemical conditions that interact with one another. So scientific studies of healthy dogs have demonstrated that, skin characteristics such as hydration, pH, sebum, temperature, transepidermal water loss vary with factors including anatomical site, age, breed, coat, and the individual animal. So the important lesson there is that grooming should never clean thoroughly. Sometimes intensive cleansing is necessary. The lesson is that cleaning is a physiological intervention, not superficial, interventions, and it's something on the surface. Every time we bathe an animal, we are not merely removing visible dirt. We are interacting with a protective biological system. So now let's talk about stress. Animal well-being is not only about avoiding extreme fear or obvious injury. It is also about understanding what stress does inside the body and reducing avoidable discomfort. Stress is not simply an animal moving, vocalizing, panting, or trying to escape. No, those are possible outward signs of an internal biological response. When the animal perceives threats, pain, discomfort, loss of control, two linked systems help prepare the body to survive the situation. So the first is what is called the rapid autonomic response, particularly activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So adrenaline and noradrenaline will help mobilize the body immediately. The second is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, often called HPA axis, which contributes actually to the release of cortisol and will support a longer lasting response. So these mechanisms are normal, and they are adaptative. They are not like dangerous. They are not diseases, but they will change how the animal's body will function, So first of all, heart rate and breathing may increase. And then energy is mobilized, because this energy will be needed for fleeing, for example, right? Or fighting. And muscles will become more tense, and attention of the pet will narrow towards the possible threat. So we'll have behaviors related to escape, defense, freezing, or vigilance will become more likely. And next to that, functions that are not immediately essential for survival, such as rest and digestion, may temporarily receive less priority. So which means basically that the dog in a stress situation kind of loses the capacity to relax because the brain is on alert. Experimental fear provocation in dogs has produced measurable changes in heart rates and stress-related hormones. So this is not just saying, this is science. It has been observed during routine, veterinary examination, and there has been also studies made in a grooming environment. And during grooming environments, it has been documented that the pets were changing in behavior, of course, heart rate, respiratory rate, and temperature across different stages of the process. So this is why behavior cannot be separated from physiology. And the animal is not creating a problem for the groomer, His body is trying to manage a problem because it's perceiving something in the environment or the procedure that is not, it's not trying to make things difficult for you. He's just trying to communicate something. So the goal is not to claim that every grooming appointment can be completely stress-free, A short stress response followed by successful coping and recovery is completely normal. And actually, it would be like kind of utopic to think that we can have a 100% stress-free grooming session. It's like utopic, right? The problem is that stress, when it's too intense, when it lasts too long, or when it's repeated too often, then the pet will feel like the stress will become uncontrollable for the pet, and the pet will become unpredictable. So a grooming appointment contains many possible stressors: transportation and separation from the owner, an unfamiliar environment when it's a new groomer, oh, I don't know the salon, where am I, right? A noise, vibration, unstable surfaces, when the table is moving or just trembling when you work on it, water pressure, temperature, handling, the way you restrain the dog as well, the smell around the dog, and many, many other things. Almost everything in a grooming session can be a stress factor. And one element may be very tolerable on its own, but then several elements combined will form what I call a stressor stack. And it will push the animal beyond its coping threshold. So at that point, the animal may attempt to flee or defend itself. It may also freeze, or shut down, Stillness alone is not proof that the animal feels safe. The fact that the animal doesn't move at all may significate that everything's all right. But it can also mean that actually is in frozen mode. So the stress is so intense that it cannot move anymore. It's like separated from its own body, and it's just like frozen. So, sorry. You must also understand that animals learn through association. If the bath, the table, the dryer repeatedly predicts an overwhelming experience, the next appointment can begin with what is called anticipatory stress. Before even the difficult stage has even started, the dog will anticipate, or the cat will anticipate that, okay, I'm not on the table yet, but when I'm on the table, I know it's going to be stressful. So even before I'm on it, I stress already, right? So it's anticipatory stress. So what we need to try is to remove what is avoidable and reduce the intensity of what is necessary, and create opportunities for the dog or the cat for recovery, right? So reducing avoidable stress will protect the animal today. It will preserve its ability to cope. It supports faster recovery, and it helps prevent grooming from becoming a learned signal of threat. Now let's talk about the groomer's body and mind, because we must also include the groomer in the equation, in the definition of welfare. As I said, pet welfare is, of course, it's very important, but we cannot forget the groomer. The International Grooming Societies is launching the Global Groomer Health Initiative, and we started this initiative with a big survey last year. And we found that 79% of participating groomers reported back pain. 79% reported back pain. 84% reported joint or muscle pain. 84%, that is 8.4 out of 10 groomers. And among groomers reporting joint or muscle pain, 39% said it would definitely force them to stop grooming in the long term. And a further 48% said it could possibly do so. So these figures tell us that pain is not an occasional inconvenience in our profession. It threatens careers. We have almost 4 out of 10 groomers stating firmly that pain will make them stop on a short or long term, So, of course, grooming includes unavoidable physical demands, and the grooming method I'm teaching, the data method, does not eliminate the fact that you have to lift, stand, repeat some movements, doesn't eliminate the noise or the need for proper ergonomics and biomechanics. But there is another part of the workload, that is important. The physical cost of working against an uncomfortable or distressed animal. When you have a pet that is repeatedly pulling away, sitting down, turning around, trying to bite you or trying to bite the equipment, fighting with the dryer, attempting to escape, from the bathtub or from the table, then what do? We compensate with our body. We grip harder, we bend further, we hold a limb longer, we raise a shoulder, we twist the wrist, or we twist whatever can be twisted in our body. So we tense the back, we rush, because the appointment is becoming late. And there is physical consequences, but there is also the emotional consequences, that also accumulate. Repeated conflict with the dog, with every dog or just some dogs, will lead to, for us as groomers, will lead to apprehension before appointments as well, frustration, and sometimes maybe guilt afterwards, like, oh my God, I didn't manage, I didn't do it properly. Why did it move around? What do I do wrong? And we have the feeling sometimes that we have to choose between the animal's welfare, the client's expectations, and the financial needs of our business. So if we want to create a truly holistic model, we cannot protect the animal while forgetting the human profession. And I think it's very important. And when I use the word sustainable, I'm not referring only to environmental impact, although environmental responsibility is important. But a grooming business must be sustainable in at least 4 ways. First of all, it must be ethically sustainable. The methods must be compatible with pet well-being. Then it must be physically sustainable. The groomer must be able to continue working without accepting progressive injury as inevitable, because it's not inevitable. Then it must be emotionally sustainable. Every working day cannot depend on conflict, distress, exhaustion. It's not possible. And then it must be economically sustainable. The business must create enough value to pay the groomers properly, invest in education and equipment, and continue operating. And all of these 4 aspects of sustainability is very often something that is lacking from a lot of groomers that I see around me, If your business is it produces very attractive results for 5 years, but then it leaves the professional too injured or exhausted to continue, we cannot really say it's really successful, can we? So better physiology will not solve every business problem, but reducing avoidable discomfort, conflict, and physical struggle is one important part of building a healthier business model. So what holistic grooming really means is that, the word holistic is sometimes misunderstood. Holistic grooming is not simply using natural product. It's not, adding essential oils, music, or spa treatments. It's not rejecting conventional science, and it's not abandoning technique or aesthetic quality, Holistic means considering the complete system and the relationship within it. We consider the skin, the coat, the follicles, the microbiota, the animal's sensory experience, the physical comfort, the emotional state, the health, age, history, and individual needs. But at the same time, we also need to consider the groomer's body, the mental well-being, the environment, the equipment, the workflow, and professional limitations. And then again, we also have to consider the owner's expectation and the practical reality of the salon. It's very important to understand that one decision can affect several parts of the system at the same time. Let's, for example, talk about temperature. Temperature adjustment is not only temperature adjustment. It can change the sensory comfort, the physiological response, the behavior, the need for restraint, the groomer's posture, the duration and emotional quality of the appointment, and the animal's memory of the experience. That interconnected reasoning is what makes grooming holistic. Now, the data method is, I would say, the first step towards a genuine holistic grooming. Data comes from the French dermatologie animale appliquée au toilettage animalier, which means basically animal dermatology applied to animal grooming. And its role is to translate the complex and fascinating science of skin and coat into practical grooming decisions. So data does not ask the groomers to diagnose disease. No, it's not our job. It does not turn groomers into veterinarian or dermatologists, even if there is the word in it. The groomer's role is to groom. But how we can groom properly depends on how we understand, what we work on every day. And how can we decide how much to cleanse if we do not understand sebum and the skin barrier? How can we discuss pH if we haven't learned nothing or simplified rules about it? How can we protect the coat if we do not understand how hair is produced and structured? How can we interpret behavior if we do not consider the animal's physiological experience? So data begins with understanding. Then it evaluates traditional practice against that understanding. So we take a rule of what is done, in what I call traditional grooming. We confront it with science and we say, okay, does it match or does it not match? And if it doesn't, we change it. We adapt the technique so that it will respect the skin, the coat, and the whole animal completely, or as much as possible, And that last part matters because grooming takes place in reality. We meet damaged coats, severe matting, health problem, time constraints as well, frightened animals and client expectations. So holistic grooming is not the search of the sort of an imaginary perfect appointment, That's not it. It is the ability to make the most respectful, informed decision possible in a real situation in front of us, right? So we're to show you how data reasoning works, we are going to examine one apparently simple question. What temperature should we use during grooming? And temperature is actually the perfect example because an enormous amount of contradictory information is passed between groomers. Some of that information is not only shared informally, it is also taught in schools, in seminars, in workshops. And yet when we examine the science, we discover a very different and much more complex story. And this story has major consequences for skin, coat, and animal behavior. So you may have heard statements like this, like, dogs have a higher temperature than humans, a higher body temperature than humans, so they need warmer water. Or things like, use whatever feels comfortable warm on your hand, warm water cleans better, so warmer is better. Or if the animal moves in the bath, it's simply because he dislikes being washed. So, and when you don't know better, each statement sounds logical, but each one contains assumptions. The first, assumes that core body temperature determines comfortable bath water temperature. The second assumes that human thermal perception is an accurate measuring instrument for another species. The third assumes that cleaning efficiently is the only variable that matters. And the fourth assumes that behavior is separate from physiology. So with data, we do not begin by accepting or rejecting these statements. We begin by asking, what exactly are we measuring? And what does the science actually allow us to conclude? When someone says the dog's temperature, what is it exactly? The dog's temperature or the cat's temperature, right? Do they mean the core body temperature? Do they mean the temperature of the skin? Do they mean the external surface of the coat? Or do they mean the thermal change detected by cutaneous receptors? All of these four are different temperatures. These values are related, but they are not interchangeable. So from a grooming perspective, this distinction is essential. Core temperature remains important, of course, for assessing the animal's health and overall safety. However, the most immediately relevant temperature during grooming is the temperature of the skin. Why? Because the skin is the interface between the animal's body and the grooming environment. It is where water and drying air change heat exchange. It is where thermal changes are detected. The animal does not directly feel temperature as a number on our thermometer. It experiences whether its skin is being warmed or cooled. How different that temperature is from its starting condition, how quickly the change occurs and how long it continues. Cutaneous thermoreceptors respond to local warming and cooling. Their response is influenced not only by the final temperature, but also by the magnitude and speed of the change. How fast and how big the change is. And a rapid thermal signal at the skin can basically occur before, how could I say that? Let's say that when this change occurs, it sends a signal to the brain. It's not something that is invisible to the body. So we have to be very careful with the temperature we use. The water can fall within a generally safe numerical range, but still create a sudden or unpleasant change on the skin on one particular animal. And this will trigger something like a movement, attempt to escape, defensive reaction, or an increase, of the overall stress load. Conversely, when we choose the right temperature according to each individual animal's physiological needs, we remove an avoidable sensory threat. The skin experiences less thermal disruption, and the animal is more likely to accept the grooming process. Basically, what does it mean? It means that when we put a temperature on the skin with our water, for example, this will send a signal to the brain. And it's up to us that this signal will be something like is perceived as a threat or as something that is not dangerous. It is very important that we understand that. And every step of grooming will be like that. Every step of grooming sends information to the brain, and this information will be processed. It will be processed. And it will be presented as, is it safe or is it not safe? So now let's talk about real concrete temperature. So if we talk about the science, we have evidence that in science that water temperature can change measurable physiological responses in dogs. For example, there is one study that placed small dogs in water, and these waters were at 25, 33, and 37 degrees Celsius. Okay, and we kept these dogs for 25 minutes, and they were swimming. And the scientists that conducted this study noticed that 25-degree water showed the highest heart rate and serum glucose. The dogs in the 37-degree water showed the highest respiratory rate, and the dog in the 33 degrees produced the least concerning combination among the temperature tested. So, of course, grooming is not swimming. I agree with that. But this study still established that temperature does have an influence on the body, does have an influence on the dogs, So it also applies in grooming. So let's talk about how temperature in grooming. So first of all, there's something I want to say. There's something I want to highlight. The most common grooming practices when it comes to temperature testing with your hand, right? So your hand can detect an extreme. It can warn you if the water is obviously very hot or it's obviously very cold, but your hand cannot tell you the exact temperature reliably. And its perception is influenced by the temperature of your own skin, of the room, of what you touched immediately before, circulation, adaptation, and of course, your personal preferences. What is warm, comfortable for you is not warm, comfortable for me, or is certainly not warm, comfortable for other species, right? This is why data replaces approximation with deliberate measurement. We use thermometer, and we also consider duration, coat density, age, health, skin condition, and species. And of course, we continue observing the animal because a correct initial setting does not remove the need to adapt, further in the process. So, what is the ideal bath temperature? The most accurate answer is there is no single temperature for every animal. There is no perfect temperature. The correct choice will depend on the animal in front of you. Within the data method, we consider the condition of the skin and coat, the skin's pH context, the animal's age, general health, body temperature, joint comfort, species, and individual response. So you probably think, oh my God, it's going to be very complicated. It's not going to be very complicated. Actually, data is very simple and logical. And we also must distinguish between dogs and cats because they react very differently to temperature. So they do not share the same data temperature scale. So I'm going to give you ranges of temperature, and I'm going to explain that to you for dogs first and then cat. But you have to understand that they are indicative reference ranges, and they support your professional reasoning. They do not replace it. Let's start with dogs. With dogs, Data ICDG uses a 6 indicative bath water ranges. Everything below 26.6 degrees Celsius, which is what I call cold water, is not recommended at all, especially for very young or older animals. Dogs who are unwell, dogs with atopic skin, or dogs with joint problems. So basically, you don't use anything below 26.6 degrees Celsius. Second step is cool water, which is from 26.7 to 29.3 degrees Celsius. 26.7 to 29.3 degrees Celsius. So this range may be used for healthy animals, adult healthy animals with healthy skin and coat. It is also the preferred range for dry, sensitive, irritated, or inflamed skin. But it is not suitable for very young animals, older animals, unwell, dogs with fevers or things like that, dogs with joint conditions such as arthritis or arthritis. And the third range is from 29.4 to 32.2. 29.4 to 32.2, which is called lukewarm water. So this you have to understand, this is like the reference range for adult dogs. Why? An adult dog skin temperature is from 29.4 to 32.2. So basically, when you wet a dog, an adult healthy dog, with a water that is between 29.4 and 32.2, when it touches the skin, it is physiological. And the brain will not perceive a threat. It will not perceive something, oh, it's too cool, oh, it's too warm. It will perceive, oh, it's just almost as my skin temperature, so it's safe. So this is what will reduce the attempt of escape, the turning around, the twisting, the bending, or whatever. The next one is from 32.3 to 35, which is called warm, which I call warm water. This one is the ideal temperature for young or very old dogs. This is also the good temperature for the dogs that is sick or with painful joints, or a condition as arthritis or arthritis. Then you have 35 degrees to 37.2 degrees Celsius, which is very warm water. This one can only be used on oily skin with no other issue. Means that you can use that at the beginning of the grooming when you have a lot of oil and you want to help remove it with warm water. But you have to make sure that there is no redness, there is no itchiness, there is no dryness, no other issue on the skin. Otherwise, you can't use it. And then everything above 37.2 is too hot. You must never exceed this temperature. Everything above 37.2 is sent to the brain as very warm, very warm, very hot. So the dog will react. And this is where most of the dog react, actually, because a lot of groomers use temperature above 37.2. So this is where the mistake mostly happens. It's very important that you measure your temperature, right? If you groom an adult dog, you will groom this dog in a healthy adult dog. You will groom this dog between 29.4 to 32.2. If you have to change for any reason, for example, it's a dry skin, so you're going to change to cool water. At the end of the grooming, you have to go back to the normal temperature. You have to go back to 29.4 to 32.2. Now let's talk about cats. Cats are very special. They require a specific different scale because they are much more reactive to temperatures that are too low, while they may show much less obvious behaviors, behavioral warning, when the water is too warm. And I relate these patterns to the fact that a feline nervous system is more sensitive to cold than to heat. And this is very important, a very important safety point to understand when you groom cats. When the water is too hot, the cat will not show signs of discomfort unless it becomes really, really too hot. Because it takes a lot of time, because there is a very few sensor, in cats for hot. it takes a lot of time for the brain to receive the information that it is too hot and you have to react, right? So you could have burned the cat far long before it reacts. That's very important. On the other hand, anything, very, very slightly too low will make the cat react instantly. And this is where there is a lot of accidents in cat grooming. So, first of all, everything below 29.4 is cold water for a cat. This will almost inevitably trigger a reaction, aggressive defensive reaction. From 29.4 to 32 is actually cool water for them. You may use that on a healthy cat with a healthy coat and skin. But the thing is that most of the cats will react anyway. So even if you need this, for example, it could be good for dry skin, but you can't use it because most cats will still react between 29.4 and 32. Some of them won't, so that's good for them. It means that we can use this tool for skin issues, but most of them won't. So unfortunately, we'll have, if we have a skin issue that needs adaptation, it won't be with the water temperature. We'll need to find other way to adapt. Then from 32 to 32.5, which is what I call lukewarm water for them, this is the reference rate for most adult cats. Most cats will not react to bath at 32.5. If they do react, it will not be because of the temperature. Because at 32.5, they don't feel nothing. They don't feel cold, they don't feel warm, they just feel wet, which is not considered as a threat by their brain, so it's okay, right? And then you have 32.6 to 35, which is warm water that you can use on elder cats or kittens. 35 to 37.2 is only for greasy coat, but with no other problem. And everything above 37.2 is a no-go. It is too hot. The cats will not react, most of them will not react, or it will take a long time to react, but it's not good for their skin. It will dry out the skin and coat, so you must not use it. You will damage their skin and coat and possibly their health. So it's very important that you never exceed 37.2, even if the cat does not react, right? So now we reach the most important part of this example. What happens when an animal experiences a temperature that is physiologically uncomfortable? So the animal may try to move away from the water. It may sit, it may turn, climb, shake, pant, vocalize, many things, can do many things, attempt to leave, bite at the hose, fight the hose. Some cats, they will try to fight, become defensive. Traditional grooming has a tendency to label these pets as difficult. So the next question for them is like, how do I stop the animal from moving? The first question we ask in data is, what is making the animal need to move? Why does he move? And is there something I can change so it doesn't move anymore, right? Movement is information. Vocalizing is information. Doing something, reacting is information. It does not give us a diagnosis, and temperature is not the only possible explanation, of course. Pain, fear, noise, pressure, etc. There is many other factors that can be involved. But when behavior changes immediately after a physiological variable changes, that response deserves our attention. So it doesn't mean the animal is refusing the whole concept of grooming. It may be just trying to reduce one uncomfortable physical stimulus, right? So before we ask ourselves, okay, do I must increase restraint? Do I hold him firmly? We should investigate on our own procedure. What is creating resistance in my own procedure? And this is where our practical observations within the data method has been particularly striking. In data practice, when bathing and, with the right temperatures, when we adjust according to the every animal's physiological need, we observe a major reduction in agitation and defensive or obstructive movement in approximately 95 to 99% of animals previously described as difficult. Yes, this includes cats as well. Yes. I've seen many salons where they went from 2 people holding the cats and fighting it to 0 cats moving in the bath. It's quite impressive, even when you're used to it. So animals who were said to be impossible in the bathtub, most of them now stand quietly. Animals who, for the drying process, now stop trying to escape continuously. So this does not mean that every animal become completely relaxed. Of course not. It does not mean that temperature is responsible for every behavioral difficulty. No, it does not mean that. It does not mean that stillness automatically proves welfare, But the figure, of 95 to 95% of 95 to 99% is a data practice-based observation, right? So the consistency of the practical response is too important to ignore. Every data groomer can testify and tell you, yes, I use this method, I change the temperatures. Even when you start the method, basically what you will do is change the temperature, because you start with the easy bits. And then all of them, without exception, will tell you, yes, the dogs stopped moving, most of them, and sometimes all of them, right? So this is something real. This is something that we can see, that we can touch every day in data grooming salons. So we have to understand that many animals are not inherently difficult. No, they are not. They are just not understood. They are not understood, They may be responding normally to a grooming process that has not been sufficiently adapted to their bodies, And our goal as groomers is not to demand more tolerance from them. Our goal is to remove avoidable reasons for resistance. Of course, there is still a very tiny small portions of pets that are difficult because they have been traumatized. They are scared, and whatever you do, how slow you go, how soft you are, they will always be difficult because, they have a trauma. But this is actually a much smaller portion than you can think. Very smaller portion. So let's see how and why there is such a huge improvement only by changing the temperature. So let's consider the first chain. I'm starting my grooming with an unsuitable temperature that creates discomfort. Okay, wrong temperature. What happens? Discomfort adds to the animal's physiological stress load, creates movement, tension, defensive behavior. Movement leads the groomer to increase restraint or physical effort. Then additional restraint will increase the stress and tension and discomfort of the animal. The appointment becomes harder for the animal and harder for the groomer. Now let's consider the other chain. The temperature is adapted to the individual pet I have on my table. One source of discomfort is reduced. The animal no longer needs to escape that stimulus. So it won't move around, it won't try to escape, or it won't freeze or shake. Its body has a better opportunity to remain below its coping threshold or begin recovering. The groomer will require less restraint and less force. The movements will become lighter, more precise. Then the groomer can work in a better position. The emotional atmosphere changes. The appointment becomes safer and more fluid. Because when the dog starts stressing, you stress. The dog can feel your stress. Then it stresses more. It's like a bad cycle. So this mechanism is behind a central data principle. If you respecting the physiology will support better acceptance of grooming. Not because physiology, is like magically, making an animal obedient. No, but because respecting physiology removes physical reasons for the pet to defend itself and reduces the biological load it is being asked to carry. I hope I'm clear there. So, what can you change tomorrow? Well, already you have the temperature, so you can change the temperature. I want you to live with something practical, so you already have the temperature. But first of all, the first action you can take immediately is like stop treating temperature as an approximate background setting. Measure it. Measure your temperature. It's very important. Do not use the animal's core body temperature as a direct target for bath water or drying air. This is wrong. I know this is something that is very common, that is commonly taught, but it is wrong. When you use the core body temperature of the dog to set your water temperature or your drying temperature, it's too hot for them. It's too hot. They feel it too hot. And so there will be, there will be discomfort and there will be reactions, and also there will be drying out of the skin and the coat. Then observe the behavior before and after an adjustment. If the animal's movement, breathing, muscle tone, muscle tensions or resistance changes, treat that change as professional data, not as bad reaction from the dog. Interpret it and adapt. And then record what works for an individual animal, a setting that is appropriate for one pet, one body, one coat, or one stage of the grooming should not automatically become universal rule, right? Sometimes you're going to groom a dog at 32, it's going to be great. And then you're going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 dogs, 32 degrees is going to be perfect. And then you don't know why another one, the 10th one, 32 will be uncomfortable. So what I like to do is have a surface thermometer. So it has to be a surface one, not medical, because when you use a medical thermometer, there is an algorithm inside it. And whatever you point at, it will change the temperature to what is supposed to be the core temperature of the body. So you don't want that. You want a surface temperature. So you want a surface thermometer. And what you can do is take the temperature inside the thigh, under the belly, where there is bare skin. Because the temperature on the skin is different from the temperature at the surface of the hair. So if you take on the temperature at the surface of the hair, you will not have the proper one. You will not have the correct one. So you need to take it literally on the skin surface. And then you can adapt. So if you have the inside, the belly, the skin on the belly, and the thermometer says, I don't know, maybe 31.7, for example, then 31.7 is your minimum. Because the skin under the hair will be a little bit warmer. It will be a little bit warmer because where there is no hair, the skin is a little bit colder. Most of the time, 1 degree. For very, very thick coats, 2 degrees, up to 2 degrees. So this is what you can do, right? And of course, this is just a small, very small portion of what data gives you, the data method. Because when you go with level 1, for example, it teaches you how to assess the variables behind the ranges, you apply them in context, distinguish paths, water decisions from drain decisions, etc. So stop guessing and measure. That's what I want to say. You measure, you observe, you adapt. Now, temperature was only one example. The same gap between simplified, traditional, and scientific reality appear throughout all grooming. pH, we often hear a single value presented as the pH of the dog skin. And this is very, very far from the truth. pH is very, very complicated, very complex. Same with sebum. Take sebum, for example. Sebum, most of the time in traditional grooming, when you discuss about sebum, we discuss it as a grease, an oil that must be removed because it's kind of assimilated to the dirt of the skin. But actually, it is the lipidic protection, it creates an environment for the flora, and it will interact with hydration and barrier function. And the flora as well. Flora is never studied in most of grooming curriculums, but a healthy skin contains a very, very diverse microbial community. Different communities actually, and with different proportions, and they are on the skin and they live there. And if we touch it, we imbalance the skin. And if the imbalance is too high, it will create a skin issue. So obviously, if we are just taught to remove everything, to flush everything away, and we are not taught that actually there is creatures living there and the way how we can respect them, we create problems for the skin, right? Hair itself, most of the time, how can we understand coat quality, regrowth, shedding, fragility, change in texture, alopecia, etc., if we never study the follicle, if we never study the hair growth cycle, the different type of furs, etc., etc. So the science in grooming is essential. We cannot answer our own questions or the customer questions if we do not have the science behind everything we do and everything we touch. It's very important. So this is why data level 1 is divided in two complementary parts. The first part is scientific. So what we do is that we explore the skin functions, structures, protective roles, the production of and growth of hair, the follicle, the pH, the hair cycle, the flora, the sebum, everything. And actually, I have to say that when you study this part, it changes the way you see what's in front of you. It changes the way you see the dog or the cat, because the skin is no longer simply a surface to wash, it becomes something alive, very alive, that you have to respect. And you have to learn how to respect. And the second part confronts this science, this scientific knowledge, with the reality of grooming. Okay, I have data, I have science, I have knowledge. Okay, what do I do with it? Does this technique fully respect the skin and coat, what should be adapted? How can, I don't know, basically, if I do something, is it compatible with the skin functioning, with what I know about how skin and coat functions, right? So data method is not simply a new list of instructions, It gives, if I give you a rule, okay, I tell you, you have to do this way, which is most of the time what is done in courses. And if I don't help you to understand why I'm telling you to do that, then This rule will be eventually repeated without context, applied to the wrong animal, or transformed into another professional myth. And I hate myth. I really hate that. You know, I created this method because I wanted answers to my whys. And my method gives answers to every why you or customer can have. Because science gives you the ability to reason, to think, to deduct. It helps you understand why the same technique may be appropriate in one situation and inappropriate in another. It gives you the confidence as well to adapt rather than copy. Because when you do something, when you copy a method that you've been taught without explanation, a lot of groomers lack of confidence, especially young groomers, because it's like going to an exam and hoping for the teacher to ask you only the minimum, because if he asks you what's behind, you didn't understand, and you will be able to repeat like a parrot what you've learned in your book, but you're not being able to explain it properly, right? It's the same with traditional grooming, with the difference between traditional grooming and data. I want you to be able to explain everything you do to yourself or to your customers. It's very important, right? So I think this method is the first step towards a genuine holistic grooming. We move from applying a protocol because it is traditional to understanding its physiological effects. We move from asking how to control an animal to asking what the animal's body may be communicating. Okay, so we move from not knowing, basically, not knowing why, to knowing why, which is, it is essential. It is essential, and it is I think, of course, data does not represent the whole or the end of holistic grooming education. There is much more. In holistic grooming, there is so many things you have to learn or you can learn. But it is an essential first step. If you want to go holistic, you have to learn the science first, because holistic, without a scientific foundation, can easily become intuition or fashion or marketing. And we don't want that. We want to understand. We want to understand the living system. We want to understand what we do, and we want to be able to adapt and answer our customers' question. This is very important. So today we have applied the data approach to one major topic, temperature. So we began with the science. We compared the scientific data with traditional grooming beliefs. We examined the consequences for skin, coat, physiology, and behavior. And then we connected the dots. The dots to the groomer's body, the emotional well-being, to the business, etc. So the data level 1 applies this method of reasoning to every step of the grooming process. Right? So if today's conference has made you question even one practice you previously considered obvious, level 1 can take you much further. It will help you understand the skin. It will help you understand the coat, as complex living systems. It will help you evaluate grooming techniques instead of repeating them automatically. And it will give you a structured foundation for moving towards genuine holistic grooming. So I thank you for attending this conference. Thank you very much. I am offering you a 50% discount on data level 1. So you can use the code shown on the screen when you register. So this code will work for the live courses, the live webinars, not the online course, So which means that it will work with the course live with me. And everyone who enrolls level 1 through this offer and participates in level 1 live will also receive a coupon for a 50% off coupon for level 2 afterwards. So you can learn more. So level 2 is about dealing with skin and coat issues. Very thorough level and very, very efficient. I would like to leave you with one final thought. Animals do not need groomers to abandon technique. They need groomers whose technique is guided by an understanding of physiology. Groomers do not need more pressure to work faster, control more, or tolerate more pain. They need knowledge that helps make the work safer, calmer, more coherent, and more sustainable. And our profession does not need to choose between beautiful results and welfare. It needs to develop the knowledge and methods required to bring them together. So the future of grooming is not less technical. It is more scientific, more observant, more adaptive, and more responsible. And I think that data is the first step towards that future. So thank you very much for your attention. So now if you have, I have questions, sorry. So how about dogs that run in the cold sea? Yes, I understand. Yes, that's because you have to understand something. Some dogs have the perfect coat to do that. And actually, they don't run in the cold sea forever. They don't. What they do is that basically they will have a time during which water will not be able to go to the skin. It will be protected by the coat and the sebum, which will make them like impermeable, sort of, almost. So for a shorter or longer period of time, they will be able to go in this cold sea and not feel the cold until at some point it goes to the skin and then they will walk out. It's completely different in grooming because in grooming we go straight through the coat and to the skin. So they will react to that. So second question. So I have read more something than talks about within. It is true. Yes, it is correct. It is correct for a healthy skin. A healthy skin will take 24 to 48 hours to rebalance properly. Flora, pH, temperature, etc. But the thing is that sometimes, if the skin is already damaged or is a bit weak, because sometimes we have the feeling that it's healthy, but actually it's not, an imbalance caused on a apparently visibly healthy skin will create a damage because the skin will not be able to recover. But yes, on a normal skin, most of the normal skins will recover in 24 to 48 hours. That is true. Does conditioning help with replacing moisture on the skin after removing everything through the shampoo? Yes, it does. But of course, there is rules. Conditioning is there to replace the sebum with what is called an artificial lipid layer. Because conditioning very often consists in an oily layer on the skin, but it is more efficient, very, very more efficient if it is compatible conditioning. So what I suggest when you use a conditioner is that it contains at least one of these elements, squalene or ceramides, because these are two elements that are compatible with sebum. These are actually natural elements contained in the sebum. And if you put on the skin, always physiology, always physiology. If you put some ceramides on the skin, because it's physiological, the skin will accept it better, and the conditioning will be more efficient. So I hope it answered your question. Do you have other questions? Did you learn something during this? Did you learn something during this conference? Yeah, provoking. But I tend to do that, Nick. Yes. Kind of provoking. It's just because it's not provoking, it's kind of because it's different. It's different and it go against a lot of things that we do at the moment, and I think we will stop doing in the very near future. So for the moment it's provoking, and I hope very soon it will become just logical. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, if you still have questions anyway after that, you can still contact me. You can still contact me on by email or on my Facebook with my name. And yes, chapters. It always is a shock, isn't it, Shelby? When people learn. Oh yes. See you soon. Yes. Thank you very much. Thanks, Diana. Oh, when will I be in UK? I don't know. I plan to go, but I don't know when. But I plan to go very soon. So yes, I will be in UK maybe at the end of this year or beginning of next one. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay. Well, I'll let you go. And thank you so much for participating. So any question, feel free to contact me anytime, anywhere. Bye bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.